There are cities in this world that carry their darkness quietly. Cities that smile at you with the warmth of their bazaars, their spice-scented evenings, their ancient minarets touching a pale winter sky, while something unspeakable moves through their alleyways, unnoticed. Lahore is one of the great cities of South Asia, with over 10 million souls. 5,000 years of civilization pressed into its cobblestones, its walled city, its gardens built by emperors who believed beauty could outlast death. In January of 1999, Lahore was living, laughing, and breathing, completely unaware that one of the most monstrous crimes in its history had already been committed. And the man responsible had decided, of his own volition, to confess. This is the story of that confession, the story of 100 children, and the city that did not see it coming. The letter that changed everything. January 1999. Lahore. Inside the editorial offices of a local newspaper, an envelope arrived by post. Unremarkable in appearance. No return address that would have alarmed anyone. Just another piece of correspondence in a city full of stories waiting to be told. But the man who opened it would later say he had to read it 3 times before his hands stopped trembling. Inside was a handwritten letter. Meticulous, measured, terrifyingly calm. The writer claimed responsibility for the abduction and murder of 100 young boys. 100 children. He provided photographs. He provided names. He described, in clinical and devastating detail, how he had lured his victims from the streets of Lahore. Children who slept beneath flyovers, who begged at traffic signals, who sold newspapers at intersections, and had no one powerful enough to come looking for them when they vanished. At the bottom of the letter, a name. Javed Iqbal. He was not asking for mercy. He was not begging for leniency. He was, in a manner that chilled every law enforcement official who read the letter, announcing what he had done with the detached composure of a man who had already made peace with the consequences. In the letter, he stated that by the time authorities came for him, if they came for him, his work would already be complete. He had already crossed the threshold. There was nothing left to prevent. The newspaper contacted police. The police contacted the prosecutor's office. And within hours, the letter had made its way into the hands of investigators who were about to begin one of the most harrowing criminal inquiries in Pakistan's modern history. The invisible children. To understand how a crime of this magnitude could go undetected for so long, you have to understand the world those children inhabited. They were not invisible because no one cared about children. Pakistan is a nation that cherishes its young. They were invisible because they belonged to the most precarious tier of society, the untethered, the undocumented, the perpetually overlooked. In the late 1990s, Pakistan's urban centers were experiencing rapid, chaotic expansion. Cities like Lahore were absorbing waves of internal migration, families displaced by poverty, drought, or the slow economic erosion of rural life arriving in the city with nothing but determination and hunger. Their children worked. They begged. They sold small goods. And sometimes, they ran away from homes where abuse or deprivation made the street seem safer than the ceiling above them. When a street child disappears, the infrastructure for investigation is thin. Families, if they can be located at all, report to police stations already overwhelmed by the sheer volume of daily crime in a megacity. Officers file reports. The reports accumulate. The victims came from this world. Boys between the ages of 6 and 16. Some were runaways. Some were working to send money home. Some simply lived where they could and survived how they could. They had names. They had mothers who wept. They had younger siblings who still asked where they had gone. They were not statistics, though they would eventually be counted as such. They were children, and they deserved protection they never received. The man from Shadman. Javed Iqbal Mughal was born in 1956 into a middle-class Lahori family. He was, by every external metric, unremarkable. He ran a small chain-making business for a period. He was known in his neighborhood. He had no reputation for violence, no documented history of aggression toward children, no profile that would have raised immediate alarm. They understand that the mask of normalcy is the most efficient camouflage available. Javed Iqbal wore that mask for years. He had, however, attracted the attention of law enforcement on prior occasions, matters that at the time appeared unrelated to what investigators would later uncover. He had reportedly been involved in disputes and minor incidents. Nothing suggested the capacity for what the letter described. He reportedly approached boys at bus stops, railway stations, and street corners, offering food, shelter, money. The house on Ravi Road. The letter contained an address. When investigators arrived at the property listed in Javed Iqbal's confession, they were not fully prepared for what they found. Inside the residence, forensic teams began cataloging evidence that appeared to corroborate the claims in the letter. Personal belongings that did not belong to the occupant. Photographs. Items that suggested the sustained presence of multiple individuals over an extended period. Most disturbing of all were containers, vessels that, when analyzed, yielded biological evidence consistent with the decomposition of human remains. The confession had described what had been done to the victims after death. The forensic findings were consistent with those descriptions. We will not linger on those details. This documentary will not traffic in the grotesque for the sake of sensation. But what must be understood, what cannot be softened away, is that what investigators found in that house represented a level of deliberate, sustained criminality that had no precedent in Pakistan's recorded criminal history. The investigation expanded rapidly. Additional sites were examined. Witness testimonies were gathered. Associates of Javed Iqbal were identified and questioned. 2 accomplices were eventually identified, young men who had allegedly assisted in luring victims. Their involvement added another layer of horror to an already devastating picture. The case was now beyond the capacity of any single precinct. It had become a national matter. The nation awakens. The news broke like a fracture across the country. Pakistani television, in an era before the proliferation of 24-hour news channels, interrupted its programming. Newspapers printed special editions. The story moved through neighborhoods, through offices, through schools, through mosques, carried on the breath of a nation in collective disbelief. The question asked everywhere, from Karachi's Defense Housing Authority to the mountain valleys of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, was the same question that always rises when a society confronts its most painful blind spots. How do we not know? How could this happen here? But these are not questions with simple answers. Because the truth embedded within them is deeply uncomfortable. It happened, in part, because a whole layer of society had been rendered socially invisible. The deaths of street children did not generate the alarm that the deaths of protected children would have. Public anger was volcanic. Parents who had never before had reason to fear for their children's safety in Lahore suddenly felt the ground shift beneath them. Civic organizations demanded accountability. Religious scholars spoke from pulpits about the sanctity of the child in Islam. Advocacy groups that had been quietly working on street child welfare for years found themselves suddenly, tragically, at the center of a national conversation. The grief was genuine, but so was the discomfort, because the nation had to reckon with the fact that the vulnerability of these children had always been there. This case had simply forced everyone to look directly at it. The hunt. After the letter was made public, Javed Iqbal had not immediately been apprehended. He had sent the letter before turning himself in, or being found. The period between the letter's publication and his eventual arrest created a brief, agonizing window of uncertainty. Was he still in the city? Had he fled? Was there any possibility that the letter was an elaborate fabrication? The answer came when Javed Iqbal walked into the offices of a Lahore newspaper, not the police. He gave an interview. He confirmed the claims in the letter. He showed journalists additional evidence. He expressed, according to those present, neither remorse nor agitation. He spoke as a man stating facts. He was arrested shortly afterward. His 2 alleged accomplices were also taken into custody. The investigation had a suspect. It had evidence. It had, most extraordinarily, a confession volunteered by the perpetrator himself. What it did not yet have was justice. The trial of the century. The trial of Javed Iqbal became one of the most attended and scrutinized legal proceedings in Pakistan's history. This was not a trial that the country was willing to observe from a distance. Every session was covered. The press dissected every piece of evidence presented. Every witness who took the stand was analyzed by a public desperate for understanding, not just of what had been done, but of how. Prosecutors methodically laid out the forensic evidence. The biological material was recovered from the property. The photographs. The personal effects of children that had been preserved, deliberately, grotesquely, as some form of record. The witness testimonies of individuals who had seen the accused with children who later disappeared. The families of the victims attended. Many of them could not afford to miss work. Many had traveled significant distances. They came not because anyone guaranteed them closure. Closure is a word that belongs more to therapy than to grief, but because they needed to be present in the same room as the man who had taken their children. They needed the legal system to see them, to acknowledge that their children had existed, that their deaths had weight, that they mattered. Javed Iqbal did not project the theatrical villainy that crime narratives sometimes assign to figures like him. He sat through his trial with an eerie composure, a composure that many observers found more disturbing than any outburst could have been. His defense offered little mitigation. The evidence was overwhelming. The confession was on record. The forensic findings had been corroborated. The outcome was not in question. What the trial was really deciding was not guilt. That had been established. It was deciding what justice looked like for 100 dead children. The verdict. October 2000. The Lahore Anti-Terrorism Court delivered its verdict. Judge Allah Bakhsh Ranjha sentenced Javed Iqbal to death, 100 times over. One death sentence for each child. The sentence was, in purely procedural terms, without precedent. 100 consecutive death sentences. Beyond that, the judge ordered that the execution be carried out in the same manner that Javed Iqbal had described carrying out the deaths of his victims. He was to be dismembered. His remains were to be dissolved. In the court's explicit language, justice was to mirror the crime. The public reaction was complex. Many people felt the severity of the sentence was proportionate to the magnitude of the atrocity. 100 lives. 100 sentences. A symmetry that felt, in the raw language of grief, like justice. Others, legal scholars, human rights observers, judicial watchdogs, raised concerns about whether courts should ever order executions designed to replicate the methods of a murderer. The principle at stake was not whether Javed Iqbal deserved punishment. The principle was whether the justice system should mirror the crime it was punishing, and whether doing so degraded the moral authority of the law itself. These debates were real. They were important, and they remain unresolved in legal philosophy to this day. But in the immediate aftermath of the verdict, they were largely drowned out by the sound of a nation exhaling. The announcement sent a new tremor through the country. Suicide, in a high-security facility housing one of the most closely watched inmates in Pakistan's recent history, struck many observers as, at minimum, improbable. Questions were raised immediately. How had a man under constant supervision managed to take his own life? Why had there been no indication of suicidal ideation in the weeks prior? Why did the death of an accomplice occur on the same day? Investigations were announced. Inquiries were promised. Official explanations were provided. Not everyone accepted them. The theory that gained the most traction in public discourse, and which was never conclusively disproven, was that Javed Iqbal had been killed within the prison, that inmates, or guards, or some combination thereof, had carried out an extrajudicial execution rather than wait for the formal machinery of the state. Whether that represents justice, injustice, or something more morally ambiguous than either word can accommodate is a question this documentary will not presume to answer definitively. What can be said is this: the legal process was truncated. The sentence was never formally carried out. The families of the victims were denied the finality that a conducted execution, however disturbing its ordered form, might have provided. And the full truth of what happened in that cell has never been established with certainty. The weight of aftermath. In the years that followed, the case of Javed Iqbal did not fade from Pakistan's institutional memory the way some criminal cases do. It left marks, some visible, some deep beneath the surface. In the immediate aftermath, child protection organizations in Pakistan reported a significant increase in public engagement and government attention. Inquiries into the treatment of street children were launched. Proposals for mandatory reporting systems for missing children were debated at the legislative level. NGOs working in urban child welfare saw an influx of support and donations from a public that had, finally, been made to confront the vulnerability they had walked past every day. Police departments in major Pakistani cities began reviewing their protocols for handling missing child reports, though the degree to which systemic reform was actually implemented varied widely. For the families of the victims, the aftermath carried no institutional dimension. It carried only grief. Some families never received formal confirmation that their missing child was among the 100. The evidentiary record, while substantial, was not complete. Some cases remained unresolved. Some mothers continued for years, some continue still, in the unbearable middle space between knowing and not knowing. That particular cruelty, the ambiguity that haunts parents who never received absolute confirmation of what happened to their children, is perhaps the most enduring wound this case left behind. Justice systems are designed for the living, for the accused, the convicted, the imprisoned. They are equipped, however imperfectly, to determine guilt and assign punishment. What they are not equipped to do, what nothing is equipped to do, is to metabolize the grief of a parent who will never stop listening for footsteps at the door. The systemic failure we must name. This case does not belong only to its perpetrator. The crime of Javed Iqbal was enabled by a system, not a conspiracy, not a coordinated effort to harm children, but a structural indifference to the lives of children who existed outside the circle of institutional protection. That structural indifference is not unique to Pakistan. It is not unique to any single culture, economy, or political system. Every society has a threshold below which certain children become effectively invisible to the mechanisms designed to protect them. The crime committed in Lahore was monstrous in its scale and its deliberateness. Children without fixed addresses, without documentation, without adults empowered and resourced to advocate for them. Without the social capital, a disappearance is urgent rather than routine. When a child from a powerful family disappears, the response is immediate, resourced, and relentless. When a child from the margins of society disappears, the response depends entirely on how much capacity is left after everything else has been addressed. That disparity is not the product of malice. It is the product of design, the design of systems built around the assumption that some lives generate more urgency than others. The Javed Iqbal case did not create that disparity. It exposed it. And exposure, painful, humiliating, grievous as it is the first condition of reform. What we owe the unnamed. There is a temptation, when confronting a story this dark, to reach for resolution. To find, in the arc of the legal proceedings, in the finality of a verdict, in the passage of years, something that resembles an ending. There is no ending here. 100 children died in Lahore before anyone outside their immediate world noticed they were gone. Their names are known to investigators. Their faces exist in evidence files. But they do not have memorials. They do not have a monument in any park or plaza. This documentary is not a verdict on Pakistan. It is not an accusation leveled at any single institution or individual beyond the man who committed these crimes. It is, instead, an argument, plain and unadorned, that the protection of every child, regardless of address, documentation, economic status, or social visibility, is not a charitable aspiration. It is a non-negotiable obligation.